following information is proudly brought to you by the National Center for Wellness.
For you when you were pregnant, was your whole experience in New Hampshire? Were you in Manhattan at the time?
My whole experience was in New Hampshire, but at one point I had gone to Boston to talk to doctors about the pituitary tumor, and they were very fear-mongering and telling me that, in more technical terms, like my head could explode during childbirth and I had to be really careful and that I was putting myself and my baby in danger. And I intuitively felt that was wrong because I had also been told by the same doctors that I would never get pregnant because of my pituitary tumor. So there was definitely this conflict between what I was told and what I felt. And I think that's an incredibly scary place to be for a mother because you don't know for sure. A lot of us aren't experienced in the medical profession and you want to do what's best for your baby. But at the same time, we all have our own intuition and understanding of our own bodies. And I think there's a real conflict that exists there because you are getting doctors who are looking out for their best interests. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that they're looking out for necessarily the experience that you want or trusting you and what you're saying about your own body. And, like you were saying about how birth is this innate process. I mean, if you have your first child, you've actually never pushed anything out of your vagina before. Right. You've pushed things out the other end. But like when you say push, it's like, what does that even mean? But somehow you know what that means in the moment. So there is a lot of intelligence that the body has. Like you're not telling yourself to breathe. You're not telling your heart to beat. Perfect. But these things happen completely naturally. And it's the same thing with childbirth. My doctor actually allowed me to pull the baby out.
Awesome.
So technically nobody did anything except watch what was going on. So right. I did deliver my own baby, but with the help and guidance of people around me who knew what they were doing, but nobody actually even touched me throughout the whole thing. Well, I think there's two elements of fear that I personally experienced. One was the fact that I was this high-risk pregnancy, which is more of a unique part of my story, being a high-risk pregnancy and the fear of what am I doing, what decisions are going to affect me and my baby. But there's another element of fear that I think is real for all women, which is fear of the pain and fear of the unknown.
Right.
And I will say that, there is this kind of a biblical and religious idea that the pain is punishment. But it's interesting. It's like pain isn't necessarily a bad thing. Pain is a sensation that's informing yourself of something that's happening. So to give it this kind of like moral context, I think is really inaccurate. And of course, pain is something that you endure, but also there's a rush of endorphins and pleasure that happens when the pain is over. Right. So it's not just like childbirth is just pain. Like after childbirth is an amazing feeling that I think a lot of women are stripped from because they're so afraid of the pain. And like I will say from a personal perspective, I felt like there was two moments during my childbirth where the pain was so intense. I was like, oh, I'm going to just die because I can't do this. Okay. And it's almost like you hit this wall. And one of the walls for me was kind of during my labor before I even started pushing and just relaxing into it because you're tensing up and your shoulders are going up and you're terrified because you've never felt pain like this. And, bringing the energy down is incredibly hard because that's surrendering. And it's hard to surrender to something you don't know. But once I pushed through that door and surrendered, I was like this calm came over me. And I was able to sleep. I was having contractions, but I was like, I'd have a contraction and then I'd fall asleep. And I'd have a contraction and I'd fall asleep. And it was almost like a meditation that I wouldn't have experienced had I had intervention with Pitocin or an epidural. And then the other moment where I thought, I'm definitely just going to die was when I was pushing the baby out, which is this other wall that you hit. You just think you can't do it. And it's incredibly fearing. It's a fearful place to be in. I can't do this. I don't know how to move forward. But you do. And if you just believe and you keep doing it and you're committed to that experience, you do get the baby out. And then it's the most amazing feeling because once the birth is over, the pain is gone.
Right.
Your body compensates for what you went through. And you actually feel euphoric. You feel amazing because you're like, wow, that was the hardest thing I've ever done. And, I just think from it's not a punishment to feel pain. And I think there was also a feminist argument that, why do I have to feel pain? I'm a woman. And I think that's also, although I'm a feminist and I love feminism, and feminism has created a different world for me, and I appreciate and honor it greatly.
Sure.
I do think that perspective of being in a feminist argument to not have a painful childbirth is miseducated or it's wrong in my worldview.
Okay, and I can appreciate that as someone who works with patients every day in pain. Pain isn't without purpose. And pain is there to create a solution. It triggers hormones, it triggers reactions, it alters the things that you do. So it prepares you to not only be present, but to make sure that you're not doing anything that would cause more problems down the road. Or
I mean, I think the things that were surprising about my experience is I had this image that I was going to be very modest, and, I was like naked and I didn't care what was going on. You really do enter your own world. And so I feel like the difficultness is just, like I was saying, I was in labor for 16 hours and it feels a lot like period cramps in the beginning. So that's familiar. You're like, oh, I know this feeling. And that when it started to increase, the contractions were more intense, it was this like unknown sensation that, again, the first thing, as the adrenaline hits you, so does the fear. Like, what is this? Like, I've never felt a sensation this intense before, because I have broken bones, I've had surgery, I have had a lot of physical things going on in my life. I've never felt a pain of that particular intensity. But I just kept telling myself, this is a good pain. And with every contraction, it's the sooner I'm going to meet my baby. So it was like, as much as you dread them coming in the next 30 seconds, it's just like, well, it is coming. And that wave is bringing me closer to my baby. I'm getting closer to my baby. So I think the biggest challenge is the psychological mind trip that you go on. And the psychological place you're in is what makes you fight it. It's what makes you tense up. And I can't even tell you how much it's the tensing up that's going to make everything worse. And it's only when you relax into it and truly become vulnerable and surrender yourself, because, just as you said, my body knows what it's doing. The baby knows what it's doing too. The baby knows how to get out. I mean, interestingly, I asked my little girl when she was 2 if she remembered being in my stomach. And she said that she did. And I said, oh, what was it like? And she said, more gentle. So I was like, wow, and she was like, and it was pink, I was like, okay, that's really interesting. And then I said, what was it like being born? And she was like, no, and started crying and wouldn't talk to me about it.
Wow.
So it's obviously, your baby is going through something as well. And it is just like, it's the biggest experience of all of our lives is being born. But since we don't remember it for a woman, giving birth. So we're both experiencing the most intense experience of our lives together. So I think just keeping your head where it needs to be and not letting it go to a place of fear or giving up or I can't do this. That's the greatest challenges. I mean, I think C-section should be a last resort option. And I feel like what's happened, with the generation of women right now is that psychologically it's almost seen like going to the dentist. I think a lot of women are going into it in a way where they haven't necessarily thought it through or haven't been encouraged to think it through of the greater repercussions on these other levels. And I think that's where, this summit and these conversations are really important. It's not like I want to sit on my soapbox and be morally superior because of my birth experience, but at the same time, what I resent about the medical establishment is just kind of not encouraging women and not having it be a part of their own dialogue to have that kind of understanding of birth. And granted, I get it that, doctors have, 15 patients plus more that they have to see a day. And it's not like they can talk about philosophy with every person that walks in their door. And so it's really, our responsibility as individuals to kind of have these greater conversations and this type of dialogue, because it's not going to happen within a hospital walls, because they simply don't have time for it. Right. And it's not necessarily they're going to be their priority, because for them, a C-section is kind of easier in the sense that it's a procedure that they're comfortable with, they know how to do, and if there's any distress for the baby, they can just do that, and that's fine. And the one thing I want to say is that I think a lot of C-sections are happening because of inductions. 4% of people give birth on their due date. So that means that most women don't, and there's actually a 5-week period that is normal, Right. So I guess from what I understand in my research, anywhere between 38 and 43 weeks is normal to give birth. It's not like we all develop breasts or, get our voices change at the same age. That happens at different times. Right. So I think having a greater understanding of an allowance of a pregnancy is, doesn't have to be exactly 40 weeks. I think a lot of these C-sections are happening because of inductions. And then once you get induced and you have the Pitocin, it's so much more painful than a natural childbirth, because the contractions are on top of each other and your body can't keep up with creating the necessary endorphins. So then you're definitely going to get an epidural, which is going to slow down the Pitocin, and your baby's going to be much more likely to be in distress, because it's a vicious cycle between speeding him up and slowing him down. So I think that, where I would encourage women the most is be very, 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 very cautious before getting induced, and only do it in a sense where you really, really feel like it's necessary, something going on with the amniotic fluid, whatever. I'm sure there are reasons beyond just, you're 41 weeks, we're inducing you, which is kind of the what I received when I went in for my checkup, and my due date was in 2 days, and my due date was on, let's say, Wednesday, and I went in on Monday, and they're like, well, if you don't have the baby by Thursday, we'll induce you. I was like, you're out of your minds, I'm not coming in on Thursday. And I had the baby on Friday, it was fine, but I really, really encourage women to not rush into being induced unless it's an emergency.